Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We will continue with the course Investment and Portfolio Management. The course code is 531 and lecture number 10. Reference is the same for the study as by Christina 2010, that is about the investment analysis and portfolio management that we are already doing during the last lectures, and we will continue with this study in the future. Summary of the last lecture is: in the last lecture we discussed the perfect positive correlation, perfect negative correlation between the returns of different assets that we are likely to purchase and keep in our portfolio holdings, and then the zero correlation. What is the zero correlation? What is the nature of zero correlation between the returns on assets? And we discussed the degree of association between the returns on assets. We also discussed the coefficient of determination. What is the significance of coefficient of determination? It was also discussed in the last lecture. And then we, at the end of the lecture, we discussed the market portfolio and the correlation between the rate of return on any particular stock and the rate of return on the market portfolio. And today we will summarize the second chapter, that is quantitative methods and investment in portfolio management. The summary of the different concepts in quantitative method will be conducted today, and then at the end of the chapter we will discuss questions and the problems and different key terms. As far as the summary of the second chapter is concerned, the main characteristics that we discussed about the investment are investment risk and return. That is, what is the risk and return. We discussed these very clearly in very open and understanding manners, so that we can be clear about what are the returns as far as the investment is concerned, and what is the risk as far as investment is concerned, and how we should take into account the return of any investment and return risk of any investment when we are going to purchase any asset and we are going to make any investment. However, to compare various alternatives of investment, the precise quantitative measures for both of these characteristics are needed, and it is because these quantitative measures are needed, and we did these quantitative measures, we different methods, we did different quantitative measures in order to measure the returns and in order to measure the risk. And secondly, general definition of return is the benefit associated with an investment, and many investments have two components of their measurable return. And what are these two components of the return as far as the investment is concerned? These are the capital gain and loss. On one, we have what level of capital gain we are going to have from any investment, and what is the possible loss. And then second, what some forms of the income that we can get out of our investment is another important component of measurable return. Then the holding period of the return. What is the holding period of return? This is another important concept. Holding period of return is the percentage increase in the return associated with the holding period. Third, investors cannot compare the alternative investments using the holding period returns if the holding periods, for example, investment time period, are different. So we can say that the alternative investment can be compared as far as their returns are concerned if the holding period for them is not same and the holding period is different. In these cases, arithmetic average returns or sample mean of the returns can be used. Both holding period returns and sample mean of the returns are calculated using historical data. So we can say that these holding time periods returns and the sample mean of the returns can be calculated with the help of the previous data available. However, all investors' decisions are focused to the future, to the expected results from the investment. So we can say that whatever the investors are doing, what measures and what considerations they take into account in order to analyze the current situation for the purchase of different items in the for the purchase of different investment. So we can say that all they do is for their future investment, and they want to extract maximum benefit out of their investment in the future, and with the minimum possible cost or minimal level of risk. And one important concept as far as this is concerned is the expected rate of return of the investment. And we have the statistical measure of the expected rate of returns, with the help of which we can measure what is the expected rate of return. which is sum of all possible rate of return for the same investment weighted by probability. So we can say that we can weight all these aggregate rate of returns by the investment weights. Then we have the concept of risk. Risk we have very clearly and in very broader way we have discussed the concept of clear and what are the factors which are associated, what are the side effects which are associated with the risk. That risk is basically the fear of having loss, or it is the danger of having loss from any investment. So we can say that risk can be defined as the chance that the actual outcome from an investment will differ from the expected outcome. So we can say it basically indicates the difference between the actual investment and actual investment and expected outcome of the investment. The total risk of investment can be measured with such common absolute measures used in statistics as variance and standard deviation. So we can say that how the risk can be measured. What are the statistical methods to measure the variance and the standard deviation? The variance basically calculated with the help of potential deviation of each possible rate of return from the expected rate of return, and the standard deviation is calculated as the square root of the variance. So when we calculate the variance and we take the square root of the standard deviation, so this is the another method with the help of which we can measure the risk associated with any type of investment or any factor of investment. The more valuable the possible outcomes that can occur, the greater the risk. We can say that the more variable the possible outcomes are from the mean value, from the expected value, greater is the level of risk associated. Continuing with the summary, we have the chapter also comprises of the statistical measures of covariance and correlation coefficient. These measures are basically used to answer the questions that what is the relationship between returns on different assets. We have discussed this in elaborated manner, and I think that you will be able to, with the discussion of the chapter, you will be able to understand these concepts and the relationship between the returns on different assets. Covariance and correlation coefficient are related, and they generally measure the same phenomena, the relationship between two variables. So we can say that the relationship between two variables is very important as far as the covariance and correlation coefficient are concerned. And the sample variance is also estimated. When the investor has not enough information about the underlying probability distribution for the returns of two assets, and then the sample of the historical return is used. So we can say that sample covariances can be calculated on the basis of the historical data, and by taking the sample of the data already available with us, and we can calculate the sample covariance, and we can find out the relationship between the returns of the particular asset. And then we move to the next discussion, that is about the population variance, that how the population variance is estimated. When the investor has enough information about the underlying probability distribution of returns for two assets, and when investor can identify the actual probabilities of various types of returns for two assets at the same time, we use the population covariance. While analyzing the relationship between the assets in the same portfolio using the covariance, and for portfolio formation, it is important to identify three basic outcomes. One is the positive covariance lying between the returns, and second is negative covariance lying between the returns of two assets, third is zero covariance lying between the returns of two assets. If the positive covariance between two assets is identified, the recommendation for the investor would be not to put both of these assets at the same time to the same portfolio, because their returns move in the same direction, and the risk definitely will not be diversified. That is, it will increase rather than decreasing. Therefore, it is not a rational decision to purchase the two assets at the same time in the same portfolio by the investor. If the negative covariance appears, the common recommendation for the investor would be to include both of these assets to the portfolio, because the returns move in the contrary wise direction and the risk in portfolio could be diversified. If the zero covariance, it means that there is no relationship between the rate of returns of the two assets. Or if the zero covariance exists, we can say that there will be no relationship between the rate of returns of the two assets, and it is not possible to keep and we can keep these two assets in the portfolio, and it would be good decision of the investor to keep and to purchase the two assets at the same time in same portfolio, because he is likely to have minimum level of risk with the maximum possible expected gain and benefit. The correlation coefficient between two assets is closely related to their covariance. So we can say when we want to have the association and we want to have the magnitude of association between two assets, we can calculate the correlation coefficient. And the concept of correlation coefficient is very much likely to be related to the covariance. That is the level of or the type of covariance the two returns or two assets are likely to have. The correlation coefficient is likely to have similar type of association with each other. The correlation coefficient can range only from -1 to the +1. That is, the value of this can range from -1 to the +1. The more closer the absolute meaning of the correlation coefficient to 1, the stronger the relationship between the returns of two assets. So we can say the closer the value of correlation coefficient to the value of the 1, the stronger relationship exists between the returns of two assets. So we can say they are strongly related. The returns on two assets, they are strongly related, whether they are positively related, that is they move in the positive direction or they move in the negative direction, they are strongly related and associated with each other. Using correlation coefficient instead of covariance, investor can immediately assess the degree of relationship between asset return. The next point is that coefficient of determination. What is coefficient of determination? What is the significance of coefficient of determination? Is calculated as the square of correlation coefficient. And it shows that how much variability in the returns of one asset can be associated with the variability in the returns of the other asset. So we can say, as far as the association between the level of association and the degree of association between the returns of two assets is concerned, the investor should be concerned with the level of variability, level of variation in the returns of these two assets. That how much one asset is likely to vary, and how much the returns in the other assets are likely to vary, and whether the variation is likely to be in the same direction at the same time or in the opposite direction at the same time. What is the type of correlation between the variation of returns of these two assets that we are taking into account. Then the next point that the summary is concerned, the theoretical interpretation of the market portfolio is that it involves every single risky asset in the global economic system. So we can say that what is market portfolio and what the theory of the market portfolio is. Theory of market portfolio is that in the global economic system there is only single risky asset which is involved in the market portfolio, and it contains each asset in proportion to the total market value of that asset relative to the total value of all other assets which are kept in the market portfolio, and the concept is known as value weighted portfolio. This is very much important concept in order to analyze the market situation, in order to analyze the situation and condition prevailing in the financial market in aggregate or overall situation. In other words, we can say investors can think of the market portfolio as the ultimate market index. This is another important point and feature of the market portfolio that can be discussed, that ultimate market index can be considered as the market portfolio by the investors. 13th important point in the summary is that the stock characteristics line describes the relationship between the stock and the market portfolio. The stock market characteristic line indicates the association and level of association from the returns of any particular investment and from the returns of the market portfolio or holding the market portfolio. It shows the returns investors expect the stock to produce given that a particular rate of return appears in the market, and helps to assess the risk characteristics of one stock relative to the market. So therefore we can say that the characteristic line indicates the returns of the investment on one stock relative to the returns from the other market portfolio, as well as the risk associated with the investment in any particular stock relative the risk associated of all other investment in the market are, which is known as market portfolio. Then 14th point in the summary is that slope of the characteristic line is called the beta factor. The importance of beta factor in the discussion of the characteristic line is that what is the beta factor? Beta factor basically indicates the slope of the characteristic line, or it is also known as rate of change. That is, it shows the rate at which the changes in the return of one stock relative to the changes in the stock of the returns of the market portfolio occurs. So it is basically the rate of change at which the returns of one stock relative to the change in the returns of the market portfolio occurs. The beta factor of the stock is an indicator of the degree to which the stock reacts to the changes in the returns of market portfolio. Then another important point as far as the characteristic line is concerned is the concept of intercept. That is, what is intercept and what is the worth of intercept? Intercept is basically the point where characteristic line passes through the vertical axis. ये वो पॉइंट है जिससे characteristic line जो है vertical axis को कट करती है. और interpretation of intercept from the investor point of view is कि how the investor can interpret this concept, how the investor can analyze and can best consider and best understand this concept is that intercept shows that what would be the rate of return of the stock if the rate of return in the market is 0. So we can say that this point tells us that what is the rate of return of any particular stock investment as compared to the rate of return of the market, which is kept at 0. Then continuing with the summary, we find the concept of the residual variance. That what is the residual variance? So we discussed that residual variance describes the deviation of the asset returns from the characteristic line. So the characteristic line is also known as time series regression line. It is the best fitted line and best fitted to the data. That is, we can say it is fitted to the data to the maximum possible extent, and it covers all the observations prevailing in the scenario in the financial market. What is the residual variance? Residual variance basically indicate the difference of the actual observations of the returns from the characteristic line. So the deviation between the characteristic line, the actual observations shows the error are the errors are the residual variance. So this is the summary of the second chapter that we have done in detail. Now we have what are the key terms? These are beta factor which are discussed in the chapter are beta factors, characteristic line, coefficient of correlation, coefficient of determination, correlation, covariance, expected rate of return, holding period return, intercept, investment risk, market portfolio, population covariance, probability, residual variance, return on investment, sample mean of return, sample standard deviation, sample covariance, sample variance, simple probability distribution, standard deviation, and covariance. All these were the key terms which were used during the discussion of this second chapter about the portfolio management and the investment. Now we come to the questions and problems associated with this topic. First is that comment why methods and tools of statistics are so important in the investment decision making. That why we should use the different statistical methods and tools in order to analyze the investment decision making for the investment portfolio. Distinguish between historical returns and expected returns. Define the concept of holding period return, and can any of these components be negative? When should the sample mean of return be used instead of expected rate of return? What does a probability distribution describe? What does covariance measure? And if two assets are said to be positive covariance, then what happens? What does it mean? 7 is that explain why does not estimated absolute covariance number tell the investor much about the relationship between the returns on two assets? What is the reason behind this logic and behind this statement? How do you understand an investment risk, and what static tools can be used for its measurement? And then we have the next question number 9. Describe the beta factor. That what is beta factor? What are the characteristics of beta factor? Question number 10. What does the characteristic line tells to the investor? Why stock characteristic lines are different for the securities traded in the same market? With which of stock characteristic line definitions presented below you agree? First is stock characteristic line describes the relationship between the stock and the market. Stock characteristic line shows the return investors expect the stock to produce given that a particular rate of return appears for the market. Then third is that stock characteristic line describes the relationship between rate of return of any two stocks in the market. And fourth is that I agree with all definitions presented above. If you agree with all definitions, you have to mark the D, otherwise you have to mark any of the 3 above. Question number 7. Calculate the main statistics used to explain the relationship between stock A and the portfolio of the market. The sample covariance between rate of return for the stock and A and market. The sample beta factor of the stock A. The sample correlation coefficient between the rate of return of stock A and the market. Then another part of the 12 is the sample coefficient of determination associated with the stock A and the market. Then we are going to start the next chapter, the theory of investment portfolio formation. We have many concepts over here. What are many concepts? The first is portfolio theory. Then second is Markowitz portfolio theory. That what is Markowitz portfolio theory? Third important point is the risk and expected return of a portfolio. And we have further points associated with the third. The first one is capital asset pricing model. What is capital asset pricing model? Second is arbitrage pricing theory. And third important point of this third risk and expected return of a portfolio is about market efficiency theory. Then at the end of the third chapter we will discuss the summary of the chapter, key terms of the chapter, and questions and problems of the chapter. Portfolio theory. Discussing the portfolio theory as far as the Markowitz theory is concerned. Markowitz theory was published in 1952, first time in Journal of Finance, and he discussed before the theory by the Markowitz, no one examined in detail in the theory of the portfolio, and prior to this investors examined investment individually, built a portfolio of attractive stock and did not consider how they related to each other. Markowitz showed that how it might be possible to the better of these simple portfolios by taking into account the correlation between the returns on these stocks. The diversification plays an important role in the modern portfolio theory. That is, the portfolio items should be diversified, and what type of items we are going to choose, what type of instruments we are going to choose in our portfolio is important. That they should be diversified, and we should not be consistent to the choice of the different items, because if one type of items may be risky and may give less return to us and may be volatile in their returns, so we can have the benefit from the other type of returns and other returns of the other type of assets. Therefore it is very important that diversification in the choice of theory is important, and diversification is the new concept which was introduced in the modern portfolio theory, and the Markowitz introduced this theory. Continuing with the portfolio theory, Markowitz approach is viewed as single period approach. At the beginning of the period, the investor must make a decision in what particular securities to invest and hold the securities until the end of the period. Because a portfolio is a collection of securities, and it is a collection of securities, it is a collection of bonds and stocks and certificates, or the objective of the investor is likely to have important benefit with the least risk and with the least cost, and therefore we can say that objective of the investor is to have the minimum cost and least cost combination. This decision is equivalent to selection an optimal portfolio from set of possible portfolios. Essentially, of Markowitz's portfolio theory is the problem of optimal portfolio selection. Indifference curves. The method that should be used in selecting the most desirable portfolio involves the use of indifference curves. Therefore, we can say in order to elaborate the portfolio theory, we have the important tool or method with the help of which we can make the concept clear is the theory of indifference curve or the indifference curve approach. And indifference curve approach is the method that is very much helpful to clarify the concept as far as the portfolio theory is concerned or the choice of the items in the portfolio are concerned. The method that should be used in selecting the most desirable portfolio involves the use of the indifference curves. And we use the different indifference curves as the set of indifference curves in order to clarify the portfolio theory. The indifference curves represent an investor preferences for risk and return. These curves should be drawn putting to the investment return on the vertical axis and risk on the horizontal axis. So we can say that we can put the return on vertical axis and we put the risk on the horizontal axis as far as the plot of and as far as the direction of these indifference curve is concerned. Following the Markowitz approach, the measure for investment return is expected rate of return and a measure of risk is standard deviation. So we can say that in order to measure the return, as we discussed earlier, the expected rate of return concept is important. That is, we find the difference between the expected rate of return and the actual rate of return, and also we find the concept of the risk associated with the help of the standard deviation and with the help of the covariance and with the help of variance between the two types of assets return. We are going to draw the indifference curve in order to elaborate the relationship between the risk and return as far as Markowitz theory is concerned. For example, we can draw a curve from the long vertical axis we have risk, long horizontal axis we have returns, and we can say that these type of variables can be the variable relationship can be indicated between the risk and the return. For example, if we say that if there is increase in the risk, there will be increase in the return. Increase in risk is likely to increase the return of any particular investment. For example, investment on the asset A or investment on the asset B. So indifference curve जो है, they are more desirable investment approach to elaborate the investment portfolio for any individual investor. That means that any of investment or portfolio plotted on the indifference curves are equally desirable. That is, we can get whether we choose for example the combination E, we choose combination E naught, we choose another combination E1. These are equally desirable for the individual because they are indicating positive return and risk. And when we move from one combination to the other combination E or from E to another combination E1, we can find that increase in the rate of return is likely to increase the risk. Because all the factors, all the combinations of these two factors, combination of these two variables, they are likely to give equal desire, they are likely to benefit the investor in an equal way. So we can say that they will be indifferent about the choice of these different indifference curves. And if one individual has more than one choices, he has more than one set of choices, so he can have different indifference curves which make a map of indifference curve and is known as indifference curve map. We will discuss the features of the indifference curve. What are the features of indifference curve? All portfolios that lie on a given indifference curves are equally desirable to the investor. So we can say that all the combination of portfolios, all the choices of the items and on different portfolios, they are equally desirable and preferable to the investor. Indifference curves cannot be intersect. So we can say indifference curves, they cannot be intersect each other. This is another important property and another important quality of the indifference curve. For example, we say that if we have one indifference curve, we have another indifference curve, we have another higher indifference curve, they move in parallel shape, they cannot intersect. We can say in other words that they cannot be like this. For example, we can say that indifference curve IC naught intersect another indifference curve IC1. This is not possible, and we do not have this type of combination between the risk and return. If we have risk along vertical axis, we have return along horizontal axis, so we cannot have the combination, this type of combination indicated by the E. So E basically indicates that there's the joint combination of the two, joint combination of IC1 and IC0, and this tells us that we have joint combination of returns and risk. It is not possible that two levels of risk and two levels of returns, they are at one combination. They lie at one combination and they are jointly measured and jointly chooses. So any individual investor cannot choose these two indifference curves at one time, because for example we have different combinations of risk and return at IC0, we have different combination of risk and return on IC1. So therefore it is not possible for the individual investors to choose these one combination at the same time lying on two different indifference curves, because one indifference curve indicates the preference level of one type and the other indifference curve indicates the preference level of the other type. For example, we can say that is lower indifference curve indicates lower level of preferences and the higher indifference curve indicates higher level of preference, and further higher indifference curve indicates further higher level of preferences. So we can say there is a set of preferences of the curve, there is a set of combinations combinations between the risk and return that are indicated by the different set of the preference curves or the indifference curves, or these are this is known as indifference curve map. So therefore we can say that indifference curve, they are equally desirable, and all combination on one indifference curve is equally desirable, they cannot intersect. And an investor, another property or feature of indifference curve is that an investor can invest and can represent several indifference curves for different investment tools, for different investment portfolios, and which make the investment map. Every investor has a map of the indifference curve representing his or her preferences for expected returns and risk, which is measured by the standard deviation for each potential portfolio. These are the important features associated with the indifference curve approach, and which help basically the investors in order to identify, in order to formulate their portfolio holdings. Further continuing with the discussion, we have two important fundamental assumptions examining indifference curves and applying them to the Markowitz portfolio theory. Assumption, what are the assumptions? The assumption of non-satiation is the first. The investors are assumed to prefer higher level of return to lower level of return. So we can say that investors, they prefer higher level of returns as compared to lower level of return. So the assumption of non-satiation indicates this preference of the investors, because higher level of return allow the investors to spend more on the consumption at the time of the investment period. And thus, given two portfolios with same standard deviation, the investor will choose the portfolio with the higher expected return. This is called an assumption of non-satiation. And this is very much important assumption which tells us the non-satiation, which tells us the systematic pattern of the choices of the individuals as far as the returns are concerned, as far as the different choice of the different assets is concerned. That is, they would like to have higher assets return rather than lower asset return, and what they will do this because they are likely to prefer the higher returns, because they spend more in the current time period in order to consume more in the future time period. At current time period, they save their resources in order to finance their current investment and to have more for the future time period when they do not have much more to they do not have much more potential to work at the end of the investment period. Therefore we can say that there is the trade-off between the investment and the consumption, or trade-off between the saving of the individual and the consumption. Thus, two given portfolio with the same standard deviation, the investor will choose the portfolio with higher expected returns, and this is the important assumption of the local non-satiation. The second assumption is of the risk averse. Investors are risk averse. It means that the investors, when given the choice, will choose the investment or investment portfolio with smaller risk. So we can say they are risk averse. They would not like to encounter the risk. Therefore, they would like to choose the type of investment, they would like to choose the return assets which are likely to have less risk as compared to those which are having the more risk. For example, if we draw the curve, we can say that the portfolio for the what is the portfolio for the individual who is risk averter, who avoid the risk. We can say the portfolio is like this, that is, there is constant relationship between the risk and return. If we have risk on vertical axis, we have expected returns on horizontal axis, so we can elaborate the relationship between these two variable, risk and return, as far as the risk averse person is concerned. Risk averse person is concerned, we can say change in risk due to change in return. Due to change in return, we say if there is increase in the one, the other will increase also. But what is the relationship between the term? Relationship between the two is constant. There is constant relationship between the two. We have a straight line relationship as far as the averter is concerned, and we have return along the vertical axis, and we have risk along the horizontal axis. We have this type of curve, we have this type of curve also. We have three basically curves. And if we look at the situation, we can say this downward sloping curve, or this inverted U-shaped curve is for the risk averter. This is for the risk averter person, and the upward sloping curve is, that is the U-shaped curve, likely U-shape or convex curve is for the risk lover, who is likely to love the risk, and this is for the risk neutral. The straight line curve is basically for the risk neutral person, the individual investor who does not have who is basically indifferent to the return and the risk. And this point, the joining point, basically indicates the equilibrium point or joining point of the two. And if we look at these three curves individually, the U-shaped curve or the convex curve indicate that increase in the risk is basically associated with the increase in return. Risk and return, they are associated positively. They are moving in the same direction, so positive relationship exists between the return and the risk. However, the inverted U-shaped curve indicates that the risk and return, they are indicating, and they are associated in negative manner. After some time, they start declining. When return increases, risk will fall. They start declining when the return increases, the risk start declining after some time period. Therefore, we are much concerned about this. This is for the neutral person, who is neutral and is not likely, is indifferent about the choices of the assets as far as risk is concerned and as far as return is concerned. If we keep risk along vertical axis, we keep return along horizontal axis, we look at this type of relationship. This tells us that when return increases, risk is going to fall. Level of risk is going to fall when return is increasing. This tells us that individual is likely to avoid the risk. He is not risk lover person. On the other hand, if we draw another curve which is like this, we have the rate of risk along the vertical axis, we have rate of return along the horizontal axis. So we can see that there is a positive relationship between the two factors. Increase in the return is likely to increase the risk, and this shows that person is a risk seeker. This is basically indicating the importance of the return and the risk as far as the nature of the individual investor is concerned. So we can say we have a number of individual investors, and as far as their interest is concerned, as far as their mindset is concerned, their thinking is concerned, and the environment is concerned in which they are living and in which they are making their choices for the investment. So it is very much important to look at the nature of the investors and the choices of the and interest of the investors as far as the choices of the risk and return are concerned, which are associated with the assets and with the number of assets. We have an example, for example, how the investor chooses between three different investments, and these investments are A, B and C. We have three different investments. One is A, other one is B, and third one is C. Following the assumptions of non-satiation, investor will choose A or B, which have the highest level of expected rate of returns. So we can see he will choose one of the assets which is giving more expected rate of return to the investor, following the non-satiation assumption of the choices. Then following the assumption of the risk aversion. What the assumption of the risk aversion indicates? Assumption of the risk aversion indicate that the investor will choose that asset that is likely to give less risk, that is likely to give more return to the individual despite the level of expected return for the investment A and B, because the risk standard deviation for the investment A is lower than for the investment B. So we can say that this type of relationships are important, and these type of assumptions are important to take into account the choices when we have to choose our portfolio, when we have to make the choices of our portfolio. So according to the theory, we can choose an infinite number of portfolio available for the investment, that we have a number of the assets in the market that we can choose, we can purchase to keep in our portfolio, and accordingly we have a number of our portfolio sets. We can have a number of portfolio assets which we can choose in our portfolio holdings depending upon the level of risk and level of return. Definitely level of return and expected level of return is appealing to everyone. It is preferred to every investor, but taking into account the cost of the investment, which is definitely the risk, we have to be careful as the investor, and we have different nature and interest and choices as far as the return and risk are associated. If we are risk averted, if we would like to choose those assets which are less risk giving, and although we are able to earn lower level of return. Similarly, if we are less seeker, we would love to have the risk and take the risk. Definitely we would like to choose and purchase those assets which are giving higher level of return and higher level of expected rate of return. And if we are risk neutral, that is, if it does not matter and mean to us whatever is the level of return and whatever is the level of risk, so we are neutral and we are indifferent to the different combinations of the portfolio, different sets of the portfolio, and we can, among a set of portfolio, we can choose any of these. But this is not very much practical assumption, this is not very much practical example, that because as an investor we are we have profit motive and we are profit oriented, and we cannot be indifferent to our choices, we cannot be indifferent to our portfolio holdings as far as the profit is concerned, as far as the cost of portfolio is concerned. And so, although there are number of portfolio available to us as investor in the field of investment, but we have to be careful and we should choose any of them very carefully, taking into account these two assumptions of the portfolio theory. Is it mean that the investor needs to evaluate all these portfolios on return and risk basis? Is it mean that if we have a infinite number of portfolio sets available to us to make the choices, so is it possible for us, or is it feasible to take into account the returns and risk of all the assets which are associated with different portfolio sets? This is up to you, or it definitely it depends upon your own thinking, your own interest, and your own ideas, that what you think about this, that whether as an investor we should choose and we should compare the returns and assets of all items present in different portfolios, and the portfolio sets can be in infinite number. Markove's portfolio theory answers this question using efficient set theorem. An investor will choose his or her optimal portfolio from the set of portfolio choices. So we can say definitely this is the nature of the investor, and as investor, as rational investor, the objective of the investment is to make efficient investment, and objective of investment is to have the optimal investment. What is the optimal investment? Optimal investment basically indicates that we want to have positive benefit with the maximum benefit with the minimum cost and with the minimum possible risk. associated with it. Therefore, among a set of most preferred set of the choices of the portfolio, we choose one or the two or more than two, whatever we like on one end, and depending upon the level of the investment or the scale of the investment, what is the scale of the investment that we are confronted with as far as the investment is concerned. And on the basis of this discussion and this concept, we can choose among the set of portfolio one optimal portfolio. One important point in this respect is that offer maximum expected rate of return for varying level of risk. That the different portfolios, they offer different expected rate of return which are associated with different level of risk. And secondly, we offer minimum risk for a varying level of expected return. On one hand, we have volatile level of risk. Secondly, there are also the assets which are present in the portfolio which have the expected rate of return, but they are also bearing the minimum level of risk for the investor. So what is the efficient setup portfolio? Efficient setup portfolio involves the portfolios that the investor will find as optimal one. And what is the optimal one? What is the efficient one that gives the minimum cost of investment to the investor, gives the maximum possible benefit of the investment? And these portfolios are called efficient frontier. And efficient frontier, they can be indicated by the curve which is known as frontier, but is made in efficient manner. The efficient frontier can be described by the curve in the risk and return space with the highest expected rate of return for each level of risk. So we can say with the highest possible return, we have some level of risk associated. If we draw this, we can say, for example, as far as the optimal choice is concerned, for the optimal choice of the items, we can say we have this type of choice. For example, here we have number of items that we are using, and along vertical axis we have gain, capital gain और रिटर्न, जिसको हम रिटर्न कहते हैं, या कैपिटल गेन या रिटर्न. Up to we see that number of items are increasing. At this point we are having maximum gain, and after that it may decline. It may be declining after maximum point. And this type of nature of the relationship of two variables who are indicating the optimizing behavior. So this is the shape of the curve which, as far as the return or the output is concerned, or the outcome is concerned, or the gain is concerned, or in other words we can say profit is concerned, or the revenue is concerned. On the other hand, as far as the cost is concerned, we can have another type of the curve. For example, we have this type of the curve, and we say number of the items that we are going to purchase. Along vertical axis we have cost कह लें या रिस्क कह लें या इसकी इनपुट प्राइस कह लें, जो भी कह लें. We can say that declines when we increase the purchase. Risk is decreasing up to some point. After that it start increasing. After some level it start increasing, we can say, or with the help of which we can indicate the or efficient portfolio. What is efficient frontier? Efficient frontier basically indicate the choice of the individual, indicating the efficient set of portfolios, and which basically indicate the risk and return space and risk and return scenario in which, with the help of which individual can get the maximum return and minimum with the minimum risk. For example, we can say if we have along vertical axis we have risk, along horizontal axis we have return, and the shape can be like this. Risk is increasing, return is increasing. After some time we say when risk is further increasing, when we become aware about the situation and the investment environment, the level of risk may decline because the economies of scale may emerge, and we become efficient manager with the passage of time, with having much more and more experience of the financial market. We may become efficient, and we are likely to face less risk with the maximum return, or in other words we can say that with having much more experience in the field of the financial market and in the purchase of financial assets, we have a lot of experience. We can make efficient choices for the portfolio with the passage of the time, and we make such choices which give us maximum return with the minimum cost and with the minimum level of risk. This is the end of the today's lecture. I think that you will be able to make your concepts clear as far as the risk and return are clear. We have started the third chapter, which is about the theory for investment portfolio in this lecture number 10, and we started discussing the portfolio theory. We discussed the modern portfolio theory by Markowitz, which was presented in 1952, which is although a very previous and theory belonging to the past time period, but it is very important and efficient theory which elaborate our concepts regarding to the investment in different portfolio, different items of the portfolio, and which guide us further for having the and for making the choices of the portfolio set for our future in order to earn maximum benefit with the minimum possible risk. And as the nature of the course is such that we are discussing about the investment and management in the portfolio, we will continue to discuss about the investment and all the factors associated with the investment, all the factors which are likely to make our investment most efficient and which are likely to reduce our cost of investment. And up till now, the important factors which are associated with the efficient investment, they are risk and return, that we want to maximize the return of the investment and with the minimum possible risk associated. And that is it with the today's lecture. We will continue inshallah in the next lecture. I hope you will be able to understand the concepts. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum. Allah Hafiz.